All right, boys, we got happy hour, and we're going to try to learn a little bit during happy hour. I have a cocktail. You guys have cocktails,
Well, not actually cocktails, but yeah, sure.
right? But at any rate, it's always fun to get together and try to learn. Now, you guys recognize this gentleman?
Yes, Andrew.
Yes, we've seen him before. What did you think, Max?
I think he's a really good debater. I've seen him before, and he basically destroys everyone.
Yes.
So
Literally watched one in the car this morning.
Yeah, we did. And you can learn a lot by watching people who are real skilled debaters. He's probably the best, as you said. Now, the left might disagree and say that he's a blood sport debater, but I don't know that there's any other way to do it. So nonetheless, this is a topic that's, I think, relevant for us. Some of the topics he covers aren't, but this one is going to be about Christian ethics versus secular ethics. So let's kick it off. I think this is covered by Rattlesnake TV. They kind of have a collaboration between them. So we're going to go through it, and we'll pause it throughout and make some comments. And
Yeah.
yeah.
All right,
And
let's
see
go.
what we can learn.
Let's go.
All right, let's go.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we're going to be watching Andrew Wilson take on a bunch of secularists on modern day debate regarding a question that often just gets dismissed, and it deserves to actually be debated a lot more because it's a completely reasonable position to take.
Yeah.
Should Christians be able to use their Christian ethics to inform their policy decisions, particularly those in power? This is a great one. So with that, let's get into the first clip.
Christians have as much of a right to rule as secularists.
All right, so Christians.
So before we get into it, do you guys have any strong opinions before we learn here from some of these folks on if Christian ethics can be a foundation for judgments that you might make if you're in power?
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes, things in the Bible can, if you're a really strong, hard Christian, your decision making is from the Bible, and your decisions are not from anywhere else. So that's just what I've seen. If you're full on Christian.
Okay. Or even if you just subscribe to Christian ethics, maybe you don't believe in God, but you still believe that they have a better ethical framework.
Yeah.
Yeah. The alternative would be you find your morals through what?
You'd probably find your morals through your own personal beliefs, which not as reliable typically.
Not as reliable. That's a good way to put it. And so it's not as reliable. It's built on self-preference. It could be built on your own self-interest. And in some cases, it could be built on your own desire for degeneracy, right?
I guess you could put it that way.
I mean, you could, like if you like to smoke cigarettes and you just want to do it. It's a kind of weird example, but you might say, oh, it's okay in my framework. And if you're taking your base of morality from a framework that is not your own, but one that is time tested and validated, then it holds you more accountable, perhaps, right?
Yes, exactly.
So let's get into it. Let's see how Andrew cooks here.
Have as much a right to rule as secular people.
Correct. Just to kind of let me flesh it out a little bit for you very briefly.
Yeah.
So the idea is secularists say that only they seem to be able to have the power to push political authority.
Do you know why that is, guys? Because of separation of church and state as part of the Constitution. So a lot of times, times you'll hear arguments from secularists that say you can't bring religion into this, or you can't have religion influence your decisions because we have separation of church and state. And while we don't want necessarily the church to rule the state, it certainly would influence your decision making and your morality. So we'll continue.
I push back against that idea and say no, Christians also should be allowed to push political authority. And just because you're a secularist, it doesn't give you any additional right to have authority than a Christian does. So this idea of separation of church and state actually doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because if Christians can push political authority, as is their right, then it seems that you're going to have Christians who are in the government and they are going to be ruling from their moral stance.
Okay, yeah, I don't actually entirely disagree with this. I would say, though, when we're talking about Christians in authority, I think that usually what they're talking about, or the criticism, is less so that they're Christian and more so that they're operating under a dogmatic ideology. And so under that concept, like, do you think it's okay for people to use dogmas in a political sense?
Like the Constitution, like that kind of dogma?
Why would the Constitution be dogmatic?
Well, what is a dogma? Let's start with that.
A dogma is an appeal to some sort of unchanging authority.
Is that what you think it is?
I believe it is.
Okay, so what is dogma?
This is a great
I
question.
have no
So
clue.
I was just going to ask you guys the same thing, but Jake is going to go through it here. So that you, think about this, because it's important when you watch Andrew debate or other people who are very skilled at this. They're very particular about defining terms so that they understand what somebody means when they're talking about it or making an argument or describing something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So let's see what Jake says.
Dogma generally refers to positions or sets of beliefs that people are expected to believe without question or without doubt.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Have you heard it? Dogma's, some of these terms might be a little advanced, but dogma is essentially like you don't question it. So you could say like,
Yeah. So kind of like the current liberals.
with their hive mind.
Yes.
Yes, you can't question anything. If you are out of compliance, you'll be ostracized.
Gulag.
It's a good point. It's a good point, Will. Okay.
This can be seen in religious, political, or any sorts of ideological systems. There are many different examples of dogma. Secularists use dogma all the time. I can think of examples such as church and state being one, actually. They dogmatically believe in the separation of these institutions. Democracy is a dogma for them. They are dogmatic about abortion and so much more. Yes, Christians have dogmas, but so does everybody else trying to push their worldview. So let's carry on, guys. Before we get there, don't forget to smash that like button. You may have noticed we're swimming against the tides in terms of shadow banning at the moment. So would appreciate it if you could leave your comments, smash the like button, and also subscribe.
Yeah. So let's look at this idea. We'll kind of flesh it out a little bit here. I think that it's fine. And by the way, that I'm not sure that the Constitution is able to be changed in certain parts of it, right? Or it stops becoming the Constitution. But I think the idea of what we have in America is dogmatic. The idea of, well, only secularists have the ability to rule because we have to separate out religious authority, right? And I don't think that we do need to separate out religious authority. I don't even think we can. And so if politicians are going to rule from a moral stance, what's going to inform their morals?
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be their religion and their dogma.
Right.
So if my dogma is informing my morals, aren't I supposed to rule from my dogma?
Well, so I think this is kind of like you can be dogmatic without appealing to a dogma, or you can be, I think a better way to put this, I think you can be secular as a Christian, right? So being secular, to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is pretty much just operating outside of religious context, right? So in government, for example, I don't think the Constitution is dogmatic because, as you mentioned, it's amendable. Something like the Bible, right? If that's your point of moral authority, I think you can operate under that. We all have some sort of moral system that we're appealing to. But I think that when push comes to shove, right? If there's an issue like evolution, for example, right? That's a lot of pushback in schools right now. I don't think that you can appeal to evolution being false purely because it contradicts the Bible. I mean, you technically can, but I don't think it's justifiable. Does that make sense? Because it's non-falsifiable. You can't, if you're just going to assume that the Bible is true as your foundation, that's operating dogmatically, and I don't think we can really make progress that way.
Yeah, but that's just assertions, right? Like, let's say that Christians did. Let's say they outlawed the teaching of evolution, right? So what? What would even your argument be? If the argument is we have to outlaw prayer, we have to move prayer out, we have to move God out of schools, we have to move these things out of schools, then when Christians are in charge, why shouldn't you be surprised when they say, "Oh, well, we're gonna move your stuff out"?
You see his point here?
Yes.
That whoever's in charge can kind of make the rules, and so just because they're in charge, they can move prayer and the 10 Commandments out of school. And so if Christians are in charge and they want to take evolution out of schools, like I guess they could. He brings up a good point, and in terms of
it's kind of not.
Now we're going to move your nonsense out of here, right?
I agree. Like if Christians are in power, of course they have the authority to technically do whatever they want.
Yeah, but what my argument is that they have every much right they have as much right to utilize that political power and authority as secularists do. Secularists and atheists have no leg to stand on when they say, wait a second, Christians aren't allowed to push their power. Yes, they are. If atheists are, Christians are too.
I agree. Maybe the better way to put it is they are legally allowed to. I don't know that they're, I mean, ethically you can do whatever you want as well, right? But I don't think it's ethically permissible. I think that this is unethical behavior.
What's unethical about it?
Yeah, what's
Well, so for example, right, if we're pushing out something like evolution, I think that leads to a lot of downstream effects as far as like
So
anti-science
does pushing out prayer.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, I mean, you would have to admit that when you were a kid, maybe not when you were a kid, but at least when I was a kid, we used to pledge allegiance to the flag, right?
Yes.
One nation under God. So it gives a reinforcement of patriotism, an idea of solidarity with your
do that, right?
countrymen,
Yeah.
right? And if prayer in school also creates solidarity between people, it gives them purpose, gives them faith. There's all sorts of negative ramifications of pushing it out, right?
Well, we know because we've seen studies around how people of faith, people that have faith, have lower levels of mental health, lower levels of divorce, higher levels of happiness. There's a lot of benefits from it. And so I think what Andrew's saying here is,
Yeah.
it goes both ways.
Yeah, you
Right.
can, if it's going against, if you're saying that it's not right for Christians to do that, then that means it's also not right for, I forget what's the name of what he is,
Secularists?
secularists
Mm-hmm.
to do the same thing. Because you can also do the same thing as what Christians can,
Mhm.
as he brought up, right? He has some good points there.
Yeah. So I think he's going to rotate, and they got another person coming in. That was actually a pretty tame debate. Both of these guys were in good faith.
I mean, that one, the liberal dude, I mean, he was not really trying to like get in a full argument.
Yeah, he was.
He was
pretty,
like, yeah, he was pretty chill about it. He was
Yeah.
like, correct me if I'm wrong and like all that. So
yeah, and that's good. Actually, those debates are generally
Nicer.
they're nice to watch. They're maybe not as drama filled.
yeah,
But
but
one
probably
thing-
the next ones are going to be a little drama.
One thing you can notice here in terms of Andrew Wilson and his tactics, boys, is he matches the energy of his opponent. And so this guy came in, chill, seemed pretty good faith. Like he agreed with Andrew on some stuff, it disagreed with him on some stuff, but it was a tame debate. When you see somebody start attacking Andrew, calling him names or being disingenuous, you see a different animal come out, and that's hopefully there'll be one of those in here because you'll get to see how he can shift his tactics, right, and
his
match
views.
energy of who he's debating with. Now, I think generally people would agree good faith debates are better and they're more productive, but ultimately not all debates are like that
Yeah.
because not everybody's like that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's get into it then.
Let's go to the next one.
Oh,
Wow, that goes quick. All right.
So it's really not a good argument to make that it is unethical for Christians to use their Christian beliefs to inform their politics. First of all, how do you actually make that argument and then not make it in reverse? That secularists are also unethical for using their secular worldview to inform their politics. That actually doesn't make any sense.
It's just two groups that
It's
have a
unfair.
different moral foundation. Both of them want to make rules based on their moral foundation.
Yes.
There's one can't be superior to the other in that framework.
Yeah, and it's unfair if one of them literally does it more, or if one of them is allowed to and the other one's not.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what you'll often hear from secularists is, oh, well, you know, Jesus people are kind and loving and nice, and you shouldn't get involved, and like you don't want to push the envelope because whatever, you're supposed to be living the word and not getting involved in this stuff. And so they sort of like guilt you into letting them take more control and power, which is not something we should fall for. Okay. Let's keep going. I might jump forward a little bit in this.
Mike O.
Is Christians have the right to rule as much as secularists?
Yeah.
Okay. So as a Christian, I can't disagree with you too much on that. However, just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you shouldn't be in power. But what you do with your morals and values should not be portrayed in how you rule. And I'm a big believer in church and state. our separation of church and state. So, you know,
People always say this, but most people don't know what the hell that means.
It's kind of
there's
big
a
word,
place for the
Separation of church and state. Like the church isn't going to run the country, but obviously, like the things that you believe, the way that you see the world, your worldview is going to be based on something. And
Yes.
and for Christians, it's based on Christian ethics, right?
Those
For a
lit-
Satanist, it will be based on Satanism, perhaps. Now,
is that a word?
yeah. Oh, yeah. They're Satanists.
Mm.
Yeah. And so we probably don't want them ruling because their time-tested traditions have resulted in, not as positive
not
outcomes.
so good stuff.
That's for another day. Let's keep.
for the religious aspect of your life and your upbringing and all that, but it shouldn't be brought into more of a power stance.
You can't separate church and state. Let me explain why.
Oh,
Have you ever elected a politician who's a Christian?
Yes.
Did you expect that when he ruled from his moral stances, which were informed by Christianity?
I
literally what we just talked about,
That's
right?
literally.
would expect that he would have ruled based off of his policies, which
What? How's he going to figure his policies out other than what he considers moral in his brain?
Right?
Exactly.
so
Yeah. How's he going to figure his policies out unless he figures it out through what he thinks is moral in his brain? As I said before, if you're a Christian and you're engaging with politics in an honest way, then you must do this. And generally speaking,
He literally
jump
just
forward.
said. He literally just said like, or he
So
said his
I feel
claim, he said like 3 words, and suddenly he's just
He drew a blank.
Uh,
I kind of feel bad for the guy. I think he's outmatched here, obviously, but he is attempting to make a point very unsuccessfully.
Yeah.
I feel like the specific people that I would vote for, elect, his policies would specifically be how I would feel, would not be based off of his Christian morals, and that's how I vote.
So where do you want him to find his morals? Like in the trash can, or like if you're electing a person to be who's a Christian into office, right? Where do you want him to get his information for how he's going to rule morally? If you're a Christian and you point to some other stance and say that's more moral than my stance, then why are you a Christian?
Oh
Wait a second.
man, he's really.
So, shit.
so, I mean,
Oh my
respect to
God.
this guy for getting up here and doing this. It's not easy to be put on the spot like this.
I think Jake brings up a great point. Doing this, and obviously,
It's
like debating a pro, basically somebody who's very good at doing this and does this a lot. It does take some guts, so we shouldn't rag on the guy too much. But he gets stuck. Sometimes you'll end up debating with somebody, and you'll get stuck because they bring up a point that you didn't anticipate or didn't think about, or they'll make you rethink your own worldview or ideology. And so this guy obviously got stuck.
Yeah, this is not good for his view or for the other people coming up next.
He seems like a nice and genuine guy, but he's pretty outmatched here.
Yeah.
But his position is just something
Let's
that
go
is
forward
so
to the next. I
easily
think we need a
debunked
new-
and actually just torn apart
guys
with a
just
few
get
simple
absolutely
questions.
Where do you want him to
brutalized.
get
Let's
his
do it. Let's do a
information
new
for how
one.
he's going to rule morally?
And this is why he struggled.
Here we go. Here's Chris.
So what's up? You think we should establish laws based on Christian ethics?
Yep.
Does
Yeah.
that go against the Constitution?
No. What part of the Constitution?
14th Amendment?
And what in the 14th Amendment would we be violating?
The fact that we shouldn't establish laws based on religious belief?
There's nothing in the 14th Amendment that says we can't establish law based on our religious beliefs.
There's definitely nothing in the 14th Amendment that states that you can't establish laws based on religious beliefs. The 14th Amendment, if anything, actually just protects religious freedoms. And one of those freedoms would be that your religion can inform your politics. In fact, the Constitution does not prohibit politicians from using their religious beliefs to shape their views or guide their vote and policies at all.
Well, there you go.
So it can shape your views, but Yeah, this is where secularists get stuck all the time. Is they say, well, you can't use Christian ethics to form any opinions. Are you kidding me? That doesn't make any sense.
And
Doesn't make any sense at all.
everything that has happened in your life, including your religion and like what you believe and stuff, will affect how you think.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right, Will. Wise beyond your years, young man.
Do you
I
think
agree.
that the morals established by Christianity in the Bible
Mhm.
have not evolved since based on secular humanism?
Wait, say that again.
Do you not think that morals established in the Bible have not evolved due to secular humanism?
Have not evolved?
Yeah, I feel like so we don't stone people to death. We don't kill people for
Yeah.
not being virgins on
Yeah.
their wedding day. What do you think that is?
Guys, this is a common argument you get from secularists or non-religious people. Is, oh, in the Bible they stoned people, or like they had slaves in the Bible in the Old Testament.
Doesn't
That
mean
was
it's a
old
good thing.
time.
That was old times. That
Now
was
it's a
before
new
the Great
time.
Flood. It was before Christ. And so now the
You can
teachings
expect-
of the apostles, there's a lot of lessons we learn in there about human fallibility and a lot of things. But people always go to this. It's a really weak argument. Let's see how Andrew deals with it.
Yeah.
What the hell does that have to do with my claim?
Perfect. I love it.
All right. Well, then elaborate on your claim.
Yeah. So I think that it's completely fine, completely appropriate for Christians who are in positions of power and authority to push their position, power, and authority based on their Christian ethical belief, even at the expense of atheists who don't really like that very much.
So how would you feel if we lived in a Islamic state
Mm,
and people were making laws based on the Islamic belief?
I wouldn't like it.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think that would be right there?
Well, for that people culture,
Yeah.
they do it now.
Do you think everyone
I
in
can't.
that culture is
There's
happy
no
with
way
that?
for me to establish, other than through Christianity, for me to say, well, they're not Christians and they're not ruling from a Christian ethic, so that's wrong. But from an atheist perspective for governance, you couldn't say that they were doing a damn thing wrong. What is actually a problem with their population having Sharia law? Even why would what's even an atheist objection to that?
Well, I think that morals that were derived from thousands of years ago
Yeah.
just are they're not congruent with our current standard of living.
Some morals that were established 30 years ago are.
Yeah, I think they're continually evolving. Yeah.
So this is fallacious here. Just because something is old
Mhm.
doesn't make it worse. That's just a typical.
Sometimes things that are old make it better because they've been more time tested.
They've
Yeah.
been tested with
Like,
time,
it's
right?
just
That's
like-
why.
Tested with time.
That's why-
It's like gender theory happened in the time continuum or time spectrum that happened in the last 5 minutes, right? And now they're trying to make that like the moral truth.
Yeah, it's weird because I mean, but like it's the same thing with like with beliefs, right? Kind of like communism and stuff. There's a reason why we don't like communism because tested with time, right?
It's been tested
Has
with
not worked very well.
it's been tested. Yeah, it's a different topic, but it's been tested in multiple areas, countries, multiple times over time, and it's failed.
Exactly.
And
lot of
people still think communism has a chance. And not
Honestly, those
only
people
like
are
we've
crazy.
talked about this a bit, but not only is it a mess theoretically, it's a mess in practice. But let's hear what Jake has to
Typical
say.
progressive fallacy, and Andrew rips through it in a few minutes' time. But there are many aspects of the modern world which are definitely newer, which I would say are definitely less ethical, such as rates of abortion, transgenderism, sexual ethics, and more. I would say that our ancestors were a lot better in some of these areas than we are. So just because it's newer doesn't mean it's better. And furthermore, he's actually not understanding the critique that Andrew's putting forward here when he's saying what's actually wrong with these Muslims having Sharia law, which is to say, from the secular atheist perspective, that's morally relative and in terms of its prescriptions about morality is ultimately arbitrary. What is wrong with a country choosing to govern under Sharia law or through the Bible for that matter? These people, and especially the secular humanists, will often say, well, it's about human thriving and it's about democracy and it's about the will of the people and it's about reducing harm as much as possible. So if the people of Afghanistan choose to run their country that way because they believe that it ticks all those boxes, then what's your objection to that? So once again, the appeal to something being old being swiftly debunked. I mean, the Socratic method, thousands of years old. people still use that a lot. And furthermore, for the secular humanists, one of the people who laid the groundwork for humanism was Aristotle, who put an emphasis on reason, naturalism, and human flourishing. Others include Voltaire, Hume, and Kant, and they're not exactly modern philosophers. And last one, he does an appeal to hypocrisy at the end there, saying, well, do you follow the 10 commandments? And even if Andrew didn't, and if he fell short of some of the commandments, he wouldn't be a hypocrite to say that the nation should be governed according to them still. If I robbed a bank and then went to prison and said, guys, you shouldn't rob a bank, I would not be wrong about that. So
you guys get that? There's a there's a common fallacy that people will say. So for example, if I was giving health advice, but I was fat,
Yeah.
I may be less trustworthy because I'm not demonstrating what I'm preaching, but it doesn't make the information that I'm saying wrong, right? Like
Yes.
if I said, hey, you shouldn't eat pizza and ice cream all day, every day, because you don't want to be fat. And then people look at me and they say, oh, but you're fat. And I'm like, yes, but that doesn't change the fact that what I said is accurate and true.
Yeah.
Of course, maybe things have more credibility when you demonstrate what you do. But his point of like, if you rob a bank, or if you're a drug addict and you recover, and you say you shouldn't do drugs, even though this person was a drug addict, like
They're telling you from their experience.
yes, it doesn't make their argument weaker. Okay, let's go.
The last guy now, and when we were at DebateCon, actually, this guy was here and he spoke out at the lunch table to Andrew for about half an hour, and it was pretty confusing and kind of entertaining as well.
It doesn't exist, bro. It's made up in your head.
What if
never happened?
What if it wasn't written down, but it was implied? Just like, but yes, it was implied by all the other evidence. Hey! You need to see the other evidence too that I bring forth. If I were to go in court, I will win. I will win.
And pretty much the same in this following exchange.
So, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I think that it's that
I know he's back.
Christians have as much right to rule as secularists or atheists.
So my answer is going to be yes, but no. We need to understand, we need to see to its fullest extent of what is Christian ethics in its totality, not because of a different sect of denomination, but we need to actually be precise because there's going to be consequences from each decision we make, which is self-evident what type of nation we live in today, where you have certain conservative Christians claim to be this nation is good, great, and greatest, but can that be tested? And if it were to be tested and it's proven that it's actually evil and corrupt, because what is the doctrine, dogmas?
Why?
For example, the Declaration of Independence.
Where's this guy going?
I don't support the Declaration of Independence because it seems to be that's not the kingdom of God nor any representation of that, because it seems to be a declaration of dependence, proclamation in freedom versus proclamation in kingdom. Why? Because there's an actual leader, a king thereof kings. There's a reason behind that.
What the hell are you talking about, dude?
Well,
I have no idea what you're even talking about.
So some people were, they were doing some stuff, and then other people were like, "Hey,
look, I understand. Look."
All right, well,
Daddy looked like a cherry.
That's so funny. Sorry, that turned red. Yeah. Okay, well, apparently we read it the same way that Andrew did. Let's see how he reacts here.
Yeah.
To me, it seems like if Christians were to rule and were to lead, my question is, what type of Christian? Because obviously secular humanism, their fundamental foundation, their doctrinal substance cannot sustain.
What if we just started with something simple like the 10 Commandments?
The 10 Commandments? My question would be, are there anything prior to the 10 Commandments that we have to account for? And if we don't do that,
I'm sure there's things prior that you'd have to account for, but let's just say that we started with that.
Well, it has to come, well, there has to be, if we account for the 10 Commandments, we need to know the reason why behind each commandment itself,
hard to watch.
from the beginning to the end. So we have the totality of reason that is logical and rational to persuade people to submit themselves to obedience, to uphold that all the way through their life. But as for this nation, we don't do that. There's problems with freedom in itself because you're allowing free will domain with corrupt individuals where technically we are.
So
there he is again.
And then
right?
other people are like, "Hey, yeah, they should do that stuff. It's good that they're doing
I
that
love this
stuff.
mix.
And then the other people are like,
Funny.
I don't think they should be doing that stuff.
We're basically children who has been given an unlawful, knowledgeable wisdom to be unwise as an option. And then we
Do you
didn't
take medication by chance?
medication.
Oh, that was a roast. Holy. Bro's just been talking for the last,
Bro's just
what, 2
yapping.
minutes and 30 seconds?
He's
I
like gone
mean-
off on some random rant that nobody knows where he is. He's just
I
like
mean,
disappeared.
this is brutal.
Are you on any
Oh.
medication?
That's actually a great rebuttal question.
Oh, not at all. Unless I'm breathing air, that's a certain type of
Okay.
medication I'm
All
happy
right.
with.
Go
I mean, I desire truth at its
I
fullest extent.
literally just don't have any idea what the hell you're talking about. Like, I
That's-
can't follow even
you
what you're saying.
Okay, so should Christians rule
Yeah.
instead of
Yes.
secular humanism? Yes, but no. There's a contingency plan behind that. I
Yes
say
and
yes
no.
to a Christian, but how can I trust that Christian when his Christian ethics are corrupt along the way or has been corrupt from the very beginning?
Okay.
Because that Christian
Yeah, but
straight
that would
off-
just apply to anybody. How can
Yeah.
you trust anybody? Anybody could, their
Everybody
ethics
has
could have been corrupted along the way. Anybody could have a problem with,
and
X, Y, and Z.
and
That really doesn't have anything to do with anything, though, right?
well, what's
Not
the
gonna-
what's the
why
point of
draft any
trust?
law? Some people are going to violate them.
Oh my goodness, this is hard to watch.
This is
All right,
honestly,
this is pretty much at the end of this.
this is so sad for this dude. I
This is
honestly
pretty
feel
much at
bad
the
for
end of this debate. Oh, here's
Oh,
another.
there's
Wait.
another one with him.
We'll fast forward just a little bit.
That courtesy can be drawn from the law's reflection
Okay.
of what is desired intended.
I'm lost again, dude.
Oh, my apologies.
In conclusion, I have no idea.
So, if anybody can decipher the cryptic message
That
hidden
was
within
hilarious.
what he was saying there, I would love to know. Please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, guys. Subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to watch another video, right here. Till next time.
Unbelievable.
That was hilarious.
Right?
That was honestly hard to watch. I was squirming in my seat there a little bit.
That was wild.
Oh my gosh.